Well, welcome everybody. It's really good to have you all here. This is a special lunchtime conversation, and this was inspired by Norbert's request because he wished that we could have another Black History conference. Well, I'm Liz Millman, and I'm from Learning Links International, and welcome to all our guests today. We've just been chatting and making sure we know who's who. But we've run Black History conferences for 5 years or more with support from Sibani Roy and the North Wales Association for Multicultural Awareness, NUAMI, or Multicultural Integration. So a big thank you to her. And this special programme has also been put together with help from Gwyneth Kessler. And Gwyneth, I think you're with us, which is wonderful, because I know you haven't been too well recently. So the idea to have a special conversation with a special focus was the suggestion. And we entitled this Dr. Livingstone, I presume. And if you can see on the little poster, there's a photograph there of greeting the statue of my brain's going here, of Stanley. So he's saying welcome, and is that Dr. Livingstone, I presume. So we'll pick up the discussion about the statues. We'll explore the positive perspectives on the life of Henry Morton Stanley and others. And then next week, we may even be following on with a story about his wife, because we've got one of our team who's a researcher who's written about that. So I think I'll just pass right on to say, Simon, if you'd like to welcome us on behalf of Belong Nottingham and get our programme started. Thank you so much, everybody.
Good. Thank you, Liz, and well, thank you to everybody who's joining us today. So Belong is a community organisation based in Nottingham that supports migrants and refugees to settle in the UK, and among other things, that means running a heritage programme, which has been looking recently at some of the African companions of David Livingstone who visited Newstead Abbey in Nottingham in 1874, Abdullah Susi, James Tumer, and Jacob Wainwright, who are all interesting characters in their own right. And we have two of our community volunteers with us today. So I'm Danny and Luc, also known as Ya Kil. So I'm going to be actually inviting Luc to talk a little bit about Belong and how it was set up. And
I need it.
Oh, people can just mute their microphones while presenting.
Please leave me alone.
So we're going to start with hearing a track from Luc. So Luc is he's an entrepreneur, musician, and dad. He's one of the people who helped set up Belong Nottingham nearly 20 years ago, and he also took part in our research program on the African companions. So without further ado, I'll launch the track Sins of Our Fathers, and then we'll ask Luc to talk a little bit about this.
I have cherished the idea of a democratic and free society. It is an idea for which I hope to live for and to see realized. But my Lord, if it needs be, it is an idea for which I am prepared to die.
You've been lied to, they're weak without you. Sins our fathers committed, said to bind you. Broke your bones but can't crush your spirit. They hope you'd lose faith but they just stir it. F the program, divided we fall. We shine to face the so-called curse of Canaan. Chill, Shaitan is real. Step up and stay stuck, choose to feel.
Ghetto to ghetto, city to city, my rap community needs deep with the nitty gritty. The scenery green, in fact, and all they pretty. See a bad boy carry dirty money like Diddy. The government, rude and other people think it better than make safe haven and slave the citizens. Billion-dollar deals, president seal. Ask queer because the nation has to foot the bill. Blurry visions, you can blame it on the blind fury. Blood cut and fuse iPhone and Blackberry. Schools get closed, more jails get open. Families torn apart way too often. I represent the minority, non-silence, militant, non-violence. They say we vandals. What do vendors do? Vandalize. We can bring the scandals to less scandalize.
You'd be lied to, they're weak without you. Sins our fathers committed, said to bind you. Broke your bones but can't crush your spirit. They hope we'd lose faith but they just stir it. F the program, divided we fall. We shine to face the so-called curse of Canaan. Chill, Shaitan is real. Step up and stay stuck, choose to feel.
You and I are the people we were waiting for. All the feathers and crewmas better come to the fore. Quick to blame the haters, but then vote for. Drop the demons back the horn like a matador. Miseducating my people was quite cynical. Stifled the growth so we never reach a pinnacle. Cynical, lyrical, inspire those in Senegal, Libya, Congo, Botswana, Togo. Slavery's gone, but the chains remain. Mentally, Western pawns maintain the old legacy. Robbery, corruption on a daily basis. White the scale, poverty's deepens the crisis. Politicians, politics, people picking up pieces. La-di-da leaders living off locals like leeches. Many people lemons, not enough peaches. Pear roots, one berry and lamb fruit in the scriptures.
You'd be lied to, they're weak without you. Sins our fathers committed, said to bind you. Broke your bones but can't crush your spirit. They hope we'd lose faith but they just stir it. F the program, divided we fall. We shine to face the so-called curse of Canaan. Chill, Shaitan is real.
Yeah.
Step up and stay stuck, choose to feel.
From the heart of darkness, where the dark lord is heartless. Even revolution starts, I hope I spark this. Last generation, the lost ones. Fascinated by bands and Air Force Ones. Forefathers to the great-great-granddaughters. Left the legacy of rape and mass murders. International aid, a poison chalice. Apocalypse now, with my peeps near the abyss. Malice in motherland, the nightmare in paradise. Acres of lands untouched, minds are paralyzed. Don't believe in any ism. Racism is alive, only that is more sudden now. You waited enough and it's to get better now. In the midst of chaos, the dust settle down. We will win, some way, somehow. Make a change with the man in the mirror. That's how, that's how.
You'd be lied to, they're weak without you. Sins our fathers committed, said to bind you. Broke your bones but can't crush your spirit. They hope we'd lose faith but they just stir it. F the program, divided we fall. We shine to face the so-called curse of Canaan. Chill, Shaitan is real. Step up and stay stuck, choose to feel.
Good. That was a really interesting track. I'll come back, Luc, and ask you a little bit about how that track connects with the work we did on the history of Congo. But maybe first you could tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got involved with Belong and how Belong got started as an organization.
All right, that's perfectly fine. Thank you very much for the opportunity to attend this meeting and also to play my track. So Ya Kil, that is my artist name. Luc Kangele, that is my government's name. And the story of Belong, it goes back to 2002 with Jean Didier. The idea, what we wanted to do is to have a place for Africans where they can come and integrate the host community, which is the British society. So it was important for us to help fellow Africans to understand how the society works. So how to find jobs, how to first learn the language, English, and then how to communicate and interact with the host communities. Back then, Belong used to be called Eric Wetu, and over the years, it has changed. So that's 2001, 2002. So we've had various transformation. Today I am the vice chair of Belong, and there are many projects that's been run at the moment. Is the ESOL courses and various projects such as the Livingstone Heritage Fund, where we were looking into the impact of Africans in the lives of David Livingstone. And so I think that covers the answer to the question.
Good, thanks, Luc. And so can you tell us a little bit about how you how this track relates to sort of your own history and to the work we've been doing at Belong with the African Companions Project?
Yes, so Sins of Our Fathers is taken from a track of my album, Love and Light. it may not be at everyone's taste, given that it is a hip hop and rap track. However, the message behind it is something that I felt strongly. Over the years, when it comes to the history of Africa, is something that's most of the time you feel like it's been told from the victors or the conquerors' perspective, and rarely from the African perspective. So we're being told that the sins of our fathers, if you then going back to the Bible, for those who read it, where it says that Canaan, the black people are cursed because of Canaan and so forth, which is, for me, is a curse from one person and not a curse from God. So that is uh, some part of my belief as well in that aspect. But in a way that I feel that what I believe is that we have to own our story. We have to be able to be responsible for what's happening to us. And that starts by knowing what people from back in the days, like in the history, whether it was Susi or Chuma or even Jacob Wainwright, and even going back to Alauda, Equiano, and so forth, the history of the kings and queens in Africa, and going even the first human being found in Tanzania, I think in the east part of Africa. So Africa's got a long history, and we're not just victims, or we have not always been slaves and so forth. So it was important or crucial for me to be part of the Livingstone project. So I wanted to find out more of the history and also kind of validate what I've already believed in, that we also have our own history, our own civilization, and is important for the younger generation to be aware of that, either during Black History Month or any other month of the year.
So one of the things you did for us in the project was really look into the pre-colonial history of the Congo. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about that.
Yes. Okay. So the pre-colonial history of Congo, then it goes back to the scramble of Africa, and it is, for me, Congo has always, although it's called a nation, but it can be looked as being a business, because the inception of that country was essentially a business of King Leopold II, who commissioned Stanley to go and discover the Congo River, and went around and then had the carve of the piece of cake, like they call it, of Africa, and all the other nation that came later on in the game, whether it's Germany and Britain, Great Britain as well, and France and Portugal. It was an idea inception of King Leopold II. But prior to that, most of the time we hear, yes, the country's been discovered, but people have always been there. They've had their beliefs, they had their civilization, they had their own way of life. And even when David Livingstone, who had good motives of civilization, of Christianity and commerce, I think that he was not applied to the way they should have been on the same level. They then ended up being a point from the stronger ones with the weaker ones. Obviously, Europe was technologically advanced, and that allowed them to colonize the Africans. And so the idea that David Livingstone had other nobles, they were wrongly somehow applied. So in essence, Belgium, especially, I'm talking about from the Congolese perspective. Belgium, they had their policy of how they could run that country, but it was more to the benefit of, first, of one individual, Leopold II, and then to the Kingdom of Belgium. And when the country became independent, they still wanted to have a hand into the say, economically or politically or even socially of that country.
Good. And so when you were in Africa, how would you have been taught as a young person about Stanley, and what's the perspective there on him?
Right. So then again, that's a famous phrase David Livingstone, je présume, is always is a famous one, and sometimes it's been the history, I'm not saying the true history of Stanley. So it's not until later reading Adam Hochschild, I think, King Leopold's Ghost, and David van Rebroek, Congo, that I kind of find out that Stanley, that was not even his real name. He was adopted. He adopted that name, and also that he had his mother was of ill repute, and he never knew his father, so he had to kind of put on a certain face or a certain attitude to be able to dominate the scene at the time. And reading more about this is not the kind of story that they tell you back in Africa. So they just tell you, okay, David Stanley came around. He said, without chemin de fer, without the railroad, there will be the Congo is not worth a penny. I think that's one of the statement that he gave. So he's been put as, yeah, he came and discovered the place, helped the Congolese to know about themselves. However, him as a person, we don't know. They don't tell you about the kind of human being he would have been. Well, if he was a good or bad person, or what was his intentions and that kind of stuff. Did he want the Congolese people to really emerge as a civilization or not? That's not the stuff that they teach you at school. And I understand that the UNESCO is trying to change that through the General History of Africa, which is written by African scholars and professors, and to have the perspective of Africa, the history of Africa told by Africans, which is important and key. And so it's something that I applaud and would love to see it happening in the years to come.
Thank you, and I hope we'll hear more from Tim Gill and maybe from Professor Fratschak as well, those different perspectives and on that. But thank you, Luc. Liz, just one quick question. Do we want to hear the second track now, or maybe have it towards the end of the session?
Would it be okay to have that towards the end of the session? We'll just see how we're doing time-wise. That would be good, because we now want to have an opportunity to welcome Norbert to make his presentation. Norbert, are you there? And yeah. You're going to your heading of your presentation is New UK-DRC Common History Revisiting and Links, Challenges and Opportunities. So it's lovely to see you, Norbert. It's really good to see you. Over to you then. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Liz. And I'm very, very happy to see again Tim after so many years, even if we email each other. And thank you to the guy who just spoke before me, because this is important. The quotation of Henry Morton Stanley that without a railway, without roads, and I will say, living in Newport for so many years, without bridge, without footbridge, the Congo, Africa, the world doesn't worth a penny. That is the challenge where we are living now. We are now people who need to put railway, road, bridge, footbridge. And what you are organizing, Liz, is really virtual railway, virtual road, virtual bridge, virtual footbridge. That is one of the most famous bridge I like in Newport is the footbridge. And so thank you very much. So that means you are really on the footstep of Henry Morton Stanley. You are doing what he did a century ago. And it's important about Henry Morton Stanley to read this book by Tim Buncher, Blood River. So Tim Buncher is a French journalist, British, who really did the same Congo journey like Henry Morton Stanley century after. And he was working also in the same newspaper, Daily Telegraph. And this is very, very interesting because he's trying to update it And what is interesting in this book, he say when he arrived in the region of Maniema, it was surprising that all the law of the development in the Congo are going backwards, because where a century ago it was built a railway there, the railway is only in the forest. So can you imagine? And that is the challenge of the Congo today. How really we stop of this vision of building a country. Someone came with this vision and then we stop it. So this is a big challenge. So I will, in my talk, quote a lot of books. I will show you a lot of books. I will send you the link. It's important for us to update anything we know about the Congo. I describe myself to be a storyteller. And you know, in storytelling, or the griot, as we say in French, we say, when you are telling a story, it's important to put chili, to put salt, to put oil, because you want this story to be swallowed, okay? If you don't know how to put salt and the chili in your story, you are not a good storyteller. And sometimes you bring also songs. And one of the songs I learned from my great mom, I was 5 in 1971. And by that time, he was almost 100. Because he died after. He was singing in my mother tongue. Okoja, Fieroja, Uzobui, Bembaobui, Mayuyu. I remember I was 5. So when we was going around the great grandma, she was singing this song. And it was not until when I was 30 that I learned the explanation of this song. It means in which way we are living now. When you go in the forest, you got the leopard in the forest killing you. When you come back on the village, you have the slave trader who arrest you. So the great mom was singing this song till in 1971, and I learned it from there. And also going back to quotation, there is a quotation I like from a friend, Malinke, who said, "The one who travels knows more than the one who went in university." So if you want to learn, you need not only to go in university, but you need to travel also. And it's important, Stanley, if I need to quote Tim Gill book, he will speak about it, is the most greatest explorer of Africa. To our friend who spoke before, we learn Diego Cao discovered. No, the word have already changed. The explorer now they use the word explorer. It's exploration. They didn't discover about the Congo. When Stanley came, he saw the Congo, the river. And when he arrived in Kisangani, he asked, where I'm now? They told him, you are in Kutaya, Congo. So he explored. And another thing is Patrice Emery Lumumba, who was in 1970, was assassinated in 1961, 17 January. He was the first Black African anti-colonial leader assassinated by a web of CIA, Belgium Secret Service, Congolese guys, all of them together. Each of them tried to play his game or to find his business inside. And Patrice Lumumba said he was assassinated on 17th of January, but on the 4th of January, he wrote a letter to his wife, Pauline. He said, Africa will write its own history, and it will be the story of glory and friendship. And this is important because it's important for us as African, as Congolese, to rewrite our stories. Why? Because we have now opportunity of not only learning, but of traveling. I couldn't imagine learning about Henri Morton Stanley in my primary school, in my small village, to have a speech on the day of the inauguration of Henri Morton Stanley statue in Dembi. Can you imagine the journey? So, and Henri Morton Stanley arrived also in our village. In 1882, he visited what is called now the Maindombe, and he arrived in Maindombe. This is also a long story. So he arrived there. So it's really the reverse of a century journey of me coming back to where Henri Montagnard was living. So which kind those opportunities we need really to learn, and we need to push forward. And because we are living in Britain, the problem of the history in the West and in Africa, all our history are connected to our colonialization. So if you are in Britain, you will learn about Nigeria, about Kenya, about Ghana, about South Africa, but almost nothing about Congo, almost nothing about Ivory Coast. If you go in France, you will learn about Ivory Coast, about Cameroon, almost nothing about Kenya or about Nigeria. So this is the challenge we are living now. We need to decolonize the approach of the African history in the West. And because we live in the UK, and I'm very, very happy, Liz, that you adopted this title that I say, Dr. Livingstone, I presume, revisiting the UK-DRC Sharing History, because this word is learned everywhere in Africa, Dr. Livingstone, I presume. Because Henri Montagnard, when he met with Livingstone, and Tim Jill will speak about it, it changed the history of the explorations. But revisiting the UK-DRC Sharing History, so because we are living here, everyone knows about the connection between the British former British Empire and its colonial countries, but nothing about the French-speaking countries. So we need to fill the vacuum. And for example, you know, when people are talking about the first boat that brought the slave from Africa to America, but no one is mentioned that this boat came from the Congo Kingdom. But because the history of the slave trade, people they are telling us the story of the colonization slave trade that they sold to you. While in Africa they told us that no, they came to kidnap our brother. This is the song of May. He said, when we are in the forest, we got to the leopard, but in the village, they are there to kidnap us. So we learned that it was a kidnapping. In this side, I was surprised to learn that no, there was not a kidnapping, it was a selling. No, it was a kidnapping. So now, because we are living in such interesting period of Black Lives Matters, it's important because a proverb in Africa says, until the lion will have their own storytellers, the story of the hunting will be every time on the advantage of the hunter. But when the lion will have their storyteller, you will learn that no, you know, the hunter was exaggerating because he was running up when the lion was roaring, and we need to put things in the balance. And one of the person who really successfully put all those things in the balance in the remarkable Reverend Youth from Column Bay. Coming from Africa, 1884 with 2 boys, he came with 2 boys, black boys in the Column Bay. He understood after living in Africa that the best way to make a change happening in Africa is to take African people, to teach them and to send them back there to become change makers instead of the opposite. And he created the Congo and then African Training Institute of Wealth. And we know that Nelson Mandela studied in the college created by one of the guys who came from this institute. So if all those people went back in Africa, created the college, the honor model of South Africa, so how many Nelson Mandela we will have today? So can you imagine? So we still have an unfinished work to do, Liz. Stanley said a century before that without railway, without road, without footbridge, without link, without bridge, Congo, Africa doesn't worth a penny. So we are the one now who need really to decolonize our view, our vision, and then to put again the bridge. About the, my friend mentioned about Adam Ochai's book, okay, I got the French and the English version. Those are, the importance of those books are not about the Henri Montagnard story, no. The importance of those books are about King Leopold II job. But we need to question also African people. We have also our part of the remote and the King Leopold II story work in Congo. And what is interesting about my friend David Van Riebeeck, because we studied in the same, I studied a little bit in Leuven University, and we got the same godfather. What is interesting about this book is really going back to the person who met Arimo Stanley. So it really gives us the balance. Instead of reading Adam Ochait, we are now the version of the Congolese of Arimo Stanley. And it was not until 2 years ago, when I came in this country in 2003 as a writer, I got a lot of books, but most of them I never read them. I came with this cartoon. So this is the cartoon we read. Look, it's Disassi. And if you read David Van Riebeeck book, it starts with the story of Disassi. But David Van Riebeeck never read this cartoon. And when I found the cartoon, I read the cartoon, I say, my God, this is the cartoon. Disassi is the young boy, one of the 10 young boys enslaved by Arimo Stanley from Kisangani. He schooled them because he wanted them to become the change makers of the Congo. As Reverend Ayush, who was a friend of Stanley, did in Calling Bay. But it wasn't the first time that Stanley did it. I think Jill will explain us that when Stanley came from the first meeting with David Livingstone, he came back in the UK with a young boy. And he schooled him in the very, very best college of London. So this one, I wrote this open letter to Archbishop of St. Azab's, and some answers I received were really bad, but I don't care. And because I grew up in the seminary, for me, the Archbishop are fathers, our fathers. I said to him, you need to listen to our side of the story of Stanley. So if you want to know the side story of Stanley in Congo, you need to read this cartoon. It explains how real, and the book of David Van Riebeeck is very, very interesting because we got the same story. And because we are talking about Congo, please, the subtitle of David Van Riebeeck book in English is very, very interesting. The epic history of a people. Because most of the time when people they are talking about Congo, they will talk about rubber, about diamond, about coltan, about King Leopold II, about Mobutu, but they will most of the time forget about Congolese people. Those people who are struggling, you have a kind of human resource there of Congo equals the west of Europe from Spain to Poland. So can you imagine such a big country? So we have a job to do, not only to tell the story, but we have this job to try to check what really we can do to help this country really to become a kind of a China of Africa, because Frantz Fanon, who was from Martinique, but one of the advisors of the independence father of Africa and of Lumumba say, Africa looks like a revolver, where really the tiger is in the Congo. So it's possible because the Congo in Africa is the only African country which is surrounded by 11 neighbors. So it's a kind of roundabout. It's a 400 tribe. That means 400 culture. That means 400 people. And those people were explored for the first time by a guy coming from Welsh, and remote and snag. He saw them. And when he came back in Britain, he told to British people, we need to go in Congo, not to colonize the Congo, to trade the Congo. And thanks to Team Jill, I came back from France. For the first time in my life, I've seen 2 copies of the treaty of remote and snag in the traditional chief. Because Adam Ochad is talking about those treaties, but where are the treaties? And for the first time, if you read those treaties, you will, and Remote Stanley was thinking about how to trade the Congo, how to link the Congolese people with British people, so that British people who were in advance of the railway, of industrial revolution, could bring the railway there, And I will start with the last map. I will ask the guy to project it to us. Is the map of the, I don't know if you got my map? I sent you the map in your email.
Simon, have you got the map?
I haven't received it. I'm going to check right now in case it's arrived.
I sent it to Simon.
Okay, I'm going to check again. Yep.
Yeah, I just sent you a map. Can you project it? And I will hand you this map, but because that will help us. Because after, and I need to say thank you to Liz, thank you to people of Dembi, for Colin Bay, to Gwyneth, to Bangor University, to Team Jill, to Heritage Lottery Fund, because they helped me not only to dig this story, but when I first started with the story of Stanley, and then by chance, by a friend, I discovered this, I learned about the Reverend Hughes and the Congo Boys. But I was surprising the number of links I found between Britain and Congo. And because before the independence, there were many British people who work in Congo. Most of them are missionaries. And those missionaries, so what we say now about the missionaries, because the first missionary we came, for example, in Uganda, he was Henri Morton Stanley when he arrived in Uganda, who wrote an article, who sent an article to Daily Telegraph, request for missionary to go there. And now there is we are now working with some friend. Yeah, this is the map. We are now working with some friend from Uganda because I'm a Catholic, and the Catholic, we celebrate the Martyr of Uganda. And the Martyr of Uganda came really on this line of Henri Morton Stanley request of the Protestant missionary, and the Catholic came after. So now there is a job we are doing, African people living in the West, linking with this father who really taught those Catholic martyrs and the British BMS. So now this is the map I produced.
Norbert.
Yeah. If I can
Norbert, you're back.
digitalize this map, if you see this map, is in incredible number of cities, towns, villages in Britain connected to the Congolese history. It's incredible. So everywhere, you are not, and when you go somewhere, you will find something about the Congo. So all those things need to be dig now. So during this lockdown period, we create what we call the Congo UK Task Force Common History. So we link with most of the Congolese who run some organization from Belfast to Plymouth, from Swansea to Oxford. So what we want now from the Heritage Lottery, and we will request your support, is we need to tell those stories of connection to our young boys who live here, because they need to understand that a century ago, people were really connected. You got Congolese people who came here, who got British who work in Congo and in Africa. So why not taking this opportunity we are on where we are living now to push them instead of going back? Of course, we will bring our part of the story. We will bring our part of the history. So I will finish there because if I need to start talking about Stanley, about use, I will speak for all the day. We need now to work very, very hard to decolonize our approach of storytelling. Reverend Hughes, what he did in Colin Bay, he started by the Congo Institute because it was the Congo House, it became the Congo Institute, but after he understood and he created the African Institute. So even if we start with our post-colonial country, it's important for us really to decolonize our approach, as did Henri Morton Stanley, who was the only explorer from the West who went back in Africa 5 times. And now the question, if this guy was a bad guy, okay, I will hand it there. African people will welcome him every time he was traveling there. No. And especially knowing people from the forest. I'm from the savannah in the forest. Ask everyone from the forest, they will tell you people from the forest. And this explains why when Remote Stanley met with Tipo Tip said to him, I will not accompany you by the Manimba because they are cannibals, they eat people. No, they don't eat people. People in the forest, if you come there to provoke them, they will kill you. And yeah, we know that we learn, people who are against Remote Stanley, they say, oh no, he killed Congolese people there. No. I wrote a slim book about the history of the evangelization of where I was born, where I said to you that Remote Stanley arrived in our village. No, the history wasn't like this. How many guns he got with him? This area of Congo suffered from the slave trade since the 5th century. So people were already using the guns there. So you will not be so stupid to take guns to fight people in the... They will kill him in the forest. How many explorers have not been killed in the forest? So we need now to question what made successfully and Remote Stanley stories in Africa. And that is the connection with Dr. Livingstone, because Remote Stanley, he considered himself to be in the footsteps of Dr. Livingstone. And he also recruited, and Tim Gilles will explain, some of the disciples of David Livingstone. So those people, and there was an exhibition in the Royal Geographic Society about what they call the Bombay Boys. So those Bombay Boys, the African who were told in India, who came back in Africa, got negotiation skills. They was speaking almost more than 5 languages. And this is why Remote Stanley, and I will finish there, when he arrived, before arriving the mouth of the Congo River, he didn't have any more food and whatever. What he did really, he sent 4 of those disciples to Boma with this famous letter to any English person on the coast. So if he was a bad guy, knowing that he was really in just 2-3 days from the coast, he will just fight those people and then he goes straight away in the coast. So coming back to what I say, we are living in a very, very good time of questioning, of learning. We got a lot of challenge, of course, the language barrier and the colonization history barriers, but we need to decolonize not only our mentality, as Bob Marley say, we need to this slave trade mentality to say, well, African people, they stole the, We need now to learn. We need, and Liz, I ask people from Dembi, from Kolumbe, all those scholars, is it possible for us to have an academic talk in Dembi so that we brought all the material we have there so that we can really question, where is the truth, where is the exaggeration, so that we learn from that. But I will not be really tired to speak about it. So thank you very much for this opportunity. And as I say, we are those change makers needed to build railway, road, and we needed to think, why not inviting Dr. Mukwege in Cardiff? We invited some years ago Desmond Tutu, Archbishop Desmond Tutu. And why not invite Dr. Mukwege? Because by this time we are talking, people are still dying in the east of Congo. Women are still be raped there. So why not taking this opportunity of linking to say, what are the new Congolese issues now? What could be our contribution from Welsh, even if we are a very, very, small country, but we can make a difference. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Wow. You just blow me away. There's just so much in what you had to say there. But I'm not going to be the first one to ask questions. Let's see who would like to lead on asking you a question or to follow up on any of your points? I can't see everybody at the same time. Let me just sort this out.
Well, Norbert, it was really great to hear all that. You have studied things from every kind of angle, and it's wonderful that you have such a wide perspective on everything. It is obviously harder for an Englishman like myself, born at a particular time, to be able to place myself, you know, in all the places that you're able to place yourself. I'm limited really to documents and to history as expressed on paper, whereas you have many sort of aspects of the story in your very heart and soul, and it's wonderful to hear you communicating this to us and looking at the past with great understanding, both of a man like Stanley and of the people to whom he came, whom he tried his best to understand as well.
I think that's really so true. And when you talk about your village, Norbert, it just makes it all so real. And I think your point about the fact that European countries only tell of their own links, like Britain tells of our links with what are now have been British colonies. I think that's a really key point, and I think that's something that we really need to do something about. I'm just looking to see if we've got any more questions at the moment. But if we haven't,
can I add just a very last thing? This is the last book I just published about Patrice Lumumba, and all those stories. The book is still in French. I don't know where I can find a little money to translate the book in English, and because it needs to be available for our young people living here in Britain. And about the Congolese history is important. This is the Bible about the Congo history. It's about Professor Isidore Ndaiwel. So this is the Bible. So if you want to learn something in the written Congolese history, is Professor Ndaiwel. So and I connected with all of them to question them, to learn, and also Liz, my own stories. I'm explaining about my village, but let me explain to you that this happened by a friend, a Belgian. Can you imagine that when I was 30, it was that on my 30 that I discovered that my grandfather was still living. And it was hiding to me because I grew up in the city and I went in the seminary. I want to become a priest. And then my grandfather was a traditional chief. And the friend who was there, Belgian, who was doing research in anthropology, invited me to help him for the research. And it became a problem because my mom said that I can't go like this. They need to do some of the connection rituals because I was disconnected with my grandfather. So, and I went living there, and that changed my perspective. I just published the book of this story of how really by can you imagine your first meeting with your grandfather that is a Belgian who is increasing. So this is the first book I just published about. So just to let you know that we got such opportunity of networking, of connecting both sides. As I learned from my grandfather, from a Belgian who came living in the village of my grandfather. I never visited. So it was him who invited me in the village of my grandfather, which an opportunity. Now I'm living in Britain. I'm very, very happy to meet with Tim Gill, for example, who changed my perspective of history. And it was every time when I talk about Stanley, I said to people, have you read the Tim Gill book? But because most of the people are the French speaking, they have not read it. I say, you need to read, this is the Bible. So thank you very much again.
Well, thank you very much. Professor Foxshock, I think you were going to ask a question, then I'll come to you, Jim.
Okay, I'm not asking a question, but I just want to comment.
A comment, yeah.
No, but for his presentation, it really enlightened me on what I thought I knew about Harry Bolton Stanley. Just a quick comment that if I understood, no, but his seems to be like eulogizing Stanley for his efforts in the Congo. Yeah, that's great. But when historians talk about colonial historiography, it's really about contextualizing what happened at that time and looking at how Europeans, in their own way, perceived Africa as an individual who contributed to the development of the Congo by taking people back and training them, by visiting Africa 5 times and so on. But we read whatever he wrote as an aspect of colonial historiography because it's not really the story of the Africans themselves, but it's the story of Africans as perceived by Stanley and other writers of his period. Mark you, Stanley has a missionary attitude just as Livingstone. And maybe to tell you something about Livingstone, there's a college here in Nigeria, in the state where I am. It's called Boys High School in Gindri. And that school has a house or one of its units named after David Livingstone. So they call it Livingstone House. I don't know why they don't have a house for Stanley, but Livingstone is memorialized as a great explorer of Africa. And of course, he also did well. So I think the point you made about decolonizing our knowledge system, our epistemologies, is quite important. But then the way to decolonize it is to be critical as you are, but the critique shouldn't be like looking at one side of the story. The critique should be like, as we say in history, balance. So you have like reported Stanley as the positive sides of Stanley. I think it's good to look at Stanley holistically, not just as one who did something great. I'm not saying we must criticize him where he doesn't, but situate his activities within the context of European exploration, within the context of European colonization, and within the context of European imperialism. That way, you must not accept that view, but situate the discussion in that context, and then people will say, okay, even though me and so on said this, I think in that way it will be balanced. You are entitled to your
Right,
No,
I think that's really
Professor,
interesting.
just 2 minutes, 1 minute. Yeah, thank you very much. No,
thank you.
You are right. Huh? I'm not saying that Stanley was a saint person. I grew up in a seminary. Where you have a good priest, bad priest, and so on. But I think history is made, in philosophy, we say that history, the evolution is made by the collision. I met with Barack Obama, and Barack Obama say, we are the product of the collision of a culture. And himself is this collision of culture. And it's possible to question, it's possible, and even in the life of an individual, someone was born a good person, he will end up a bad person and the opposite. So I think it's possible for us as African to put those things in a balance, to question, to learn, to listen, and to check. I read, this famous book of Chinua Achebe, the problem with Nigeria, and what is written about this famous book of Joseph Conrad. Yeah. So it's important and very interesting.
Yeah, the trouble with Nigeria. The trouble with Nigeria.
The trouble with Nigeria. Yeah, I translated this book in French for the Congolese people.
Yeah.
I changed Nigeria by Congolese, and it's very, very interesting. Yeah. So if you remove Nigeria, you put Congo, it helps to decolonize the Congolese. Yeah. So it is important because if you talk about this book in Congolese scholars and academy, they never read it. They never read Tim Gill. They never read Joseph Conrad. They never, because those belong to no. We need opportunity. I'm now to live here is to bring all those, to open those doors, vice versa. not only to reopen the Congolese doors to Welsh, but the opposite. And we are those change makers. Barack Obama told to me, Norbert, you are those change makers Africa needs. So you and me, we are those change makers. And we got people like Tim, like Liz, they are there because we need umbrella. We need godfathers and godmothers. And luckily, I made a comment during the Black Lives Matters that since I came here in 2000s, I never experienced the racism. Probably I'm lucky. No, someone can insult me.
Congratulations.
I never, and only God knows where I was living in Belgium, in the Dutch area, Bruges,
Congratulations.
no Bruges, and coming here, living in Welsh. So I'm lucky probably, but why not taking this opportunity of a bridge, of living with those wonderful people? And then, as the proverb say in my mother tongue, when you go in a new village, don't start dancing with the left leg, where the inhabitants themselves are dancing with the right leg. Starting learning dancing with them, with their way of starting with the left leg. And when you are dancing, if you are a good dancer, everyone will see that you are a good dancer. And then you teach them your way of starting with the right one. And the village will become rich of two ways of dancing. Their old way of dancing with the left leg, and your new way of dancing, starting with, and this is the word, you know, all the independence father was dreaming, the Kwame Nkrumah, the Aimé Césaire, the Léopold Sédar Senghor. We are those change makers to make those change happen. Thanks, Professor.
Yeah. I just want to make reference to a book like this. It's by William G. Mosley, and the title is Taking Sides, Clashing Views on African Issues. Taking Sides, Clashing Views on African History. What you are saying can be situated within this book because we have different perspectives of African history. You are bringing a perspective, there are other perspectives, and all the perspectives, I think, should converge at a point. But in history, like the debate went when I made my presentation, history is always a controversial issue. It depends on who is reading it, it depends on who is writing what, and it depends on the interest being projected. But your work can be situated within these clashing views on African issues.
Thank you very much indeed. I think that's really helpful. And what I would ask is, if you're sharing a book, do you mind putting the details of the book onto the chat or letting me have it afterwards? And that way
I can put it on. Okay.
Yeah, okay.
But
that would help. Now, Jim, you had a question you wanted to ask, or a point you wanted to follow up with Norbert.
I want to make a couple of brief comments.
Thank you, Jim.
I want to comment on something Norbert has said, and I also want to comment on what Ya Kil has said, and I'll be very brief. I'm 77 years old, and for the last 45 years, I've been involved in education, either a lecturer in a further education college or university lecturer on and off for the last 45 years. And I've written a great deal about history, Black history. And on one time, I helped to manage a union training college for shop stewards and activists within the trade union movement. And I must say, I was very, very enthusiastic about teaching my fellow workers or learning about the views of my fellow workers as I grew up in the trade union movement. I've been a union member for over 60 years. And it was very difficult seeking to talk about history, and especially Black history, within working class, white working class, but even more so since the 70s and 80s and 90s, when a number of Black people disproportionately joined trade union for protection, of course, and to help them with combating racism at work. They were most reluctant to engage in conversations about Black history and so on. And I did my best to be tactical on how I talked about these subjects. So one thing on Ya Kil said about the Europeans were more advanced technologically, and that what probably made it possible for them to conquer so much of Africa and colonize it. And I'm sure Ya Kil didn't meant it that way, but a number of people still think that way. My feeling and my research has shown that Africa, the empires of Benin and its history in terms of medicine, art, civilization, architecture, and lots more education were as good or if not better because they have a longer history. The Egyptians, the Nubians, the Ghanaian and Malian, all the civilization that educated Europe on a range of things, and they were far more advanced. One of the big problems while colonization and imperialism took roots in Africa is because of the divisions and the inter-wars and civil wars and so on. And much of that, not in that depth, but in thinking, we still share some of that divisions and so on.
Yeah.
The other point I want to make about, one sec, thank you, about Norbert's contribution, it stuck in my mind what he said, and I think it's so important, and I'm glad people talked a little bit about it, is that we need to decolonize our brains, our thinking. And even in today's generation, my children in the 50s, my grandchildren in the 20s and teenage years, there's still this struggle about engaging them in Black history, in African history, in Asian history, in South American history. And I struggle with it. Much of the papers I've written and the books I've written, I often hand them out for free. And I try to get their contact followed through whether they've read it. And 9 out of 10 times they haven't read it, but they're still got a signed copy of my book. But how do we get through this, Norbert and Ya Kil, about bringing the generations along to understand, to be confident enough to explore and scrutinize and learn and share our historical perspective, which are great. Some of it is not so good. Some of it is about collusion, about division, about disunity, not having a confidence or not taking a risk to explore our past. So thank you both for your excellent contributions and our colleagues who ask questions and who engage in that discussion. Sorry for taking so long.
That's all right, Jim, because I think the points that you're making are really, really important. And as we get to know one another as a group of people, and we're always welcoming new colleagues in. But I think that point you made about how do we get through to people about the stories of Black history and how to learn and to share. I'm thinking maybe next week we might concentrate on that, because this is a big issue.
Yes.
In Wales. Black history is going to be included in the curriculum, but how are we sharing? And there's some really, really good points came up. Now, Mr. Juma, you had your hand up, I think, to ask a question. Was that right? Or were you just investigating? Yeah, good.
Well,
right.
no, if there are you still have lecturers who are coming through, or is it time for question and answer only?
No, we're going to hear from Tim Gill next. That's going to be our next phase. So would you like to keep your question till the end?
Oh,
and then
wonderful,
we'll have
yes.
a general discussion then when we finished everything else. We've gone through the presentations.
Excellent.
Okay.
It's been a really wonderful day.
Oh, that's really good. Good of you to say. Thank you. So I think at this point then, Tim, is it all right if we ask you if you would like to make your presentation? I don't know if you've got a PowerPoint or whether you're just talking to us. Yeah, Tim, on mic.
Okay, I can do it. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes,
you hear me?
That's perfect. Yes,
Okay.
that's wonderful. Thank
Yes.
you. Everybody else can switch off their
Yes.
mics. Yes, they're all good. Thank you. Over to you then, Jim.
Yes.
Tell us about the book and tell us about your.
It's you've all blown my mind. I'm the biographer not merely of Stanley, but I'm also Livingstone's biographer. When I was a very young man, I went to Africa on a journey overland from Cairo down the Nile and so forth, and eventually ended up in South Africa, where I worked briefly for the British and Foreign Bible Society. And I think ever since that journey, I was immensely impressed by the sheer amazing tenacity of European African explorers. You know, a lot of them were seriously ill. Several died. Some were attacked. It was the time of the East African slave trade. And my life was really changed by that journey and that visit to Africa at that time. I wanted to write Stanley's life because I felt for years that it wasn't quite right, the view of him, which generally obtained. But I couldn't get the papers. And I had to wait. I wrote Livingstone in 1973. It's still in print, I'm proud to say. But I was not able to write Stanley's life till from 2003, because I couldn't get the papers till then, because the Belgian government wouldn't release them. But then they did. And so I've been able to do it. Now, all the people who wrote Stanley's lives before were denied the use of this particular massive collection. The Stanley family would only leak out tiny little bits because they were terrified. They didn't know what was in the collection themselves, and they were terrified that people would steal them. And I think they were probably quite right. So anyway, so I was able to, I mean, all the people who came before, McLean, for example, and others, particularly in the 80s and 90s, wrote very savagely condemnatory books about Stanley. And I found, you know, that he wasn't actually like that. I haven't got time, you know, in talking to you today to talk about, you know, how he was said to have been violent and all these things. I have to concentrate on one thing, which is of interest today, I think, because it's about the Congo. And what I want really to talk about is that terribly grave allegation that was made against Stanley, that he handed the Congo to Leopold on a plate. He made it the king's personal toy for him to exploit as he chose. And I can only really answer this by doing some historical detail. So I'll try to do that. I'm afraid I'm going to have to read it, which won't be so spontaneous, but I'll do my very best. In August 1879, when Stanley's little flotilla of steamers began its voyage up the wide Brown River, what did he really believe his mission for the king was about? Certainly not to hand the Congo to Leopold. He told a friend, "I propose to do my best to open up the valley of this mighty African river to the world's commerce or die in the attempt." And to Leopold, he pointedly wrote, "We are here charged to perform a task which I believe is a sacred one." Well, today, the idea of bringing commerce to an unexplored part of Africa would absolutely not be considered sacred. So what had Stanley got in mind? The answer lies in the immense influence Dr. David Livingstone exerted over him after their time together in Africa. And this is exactly the point that Norbert was making. Livingstone saw Africa's rivers as God's highways into the interior, pathways for traders and missionaries to navigate into an interior otherwise closed to them by jungles and the tsetse fly, which killed all draft animals. Livingstone believed that chiefs would only stop their slave raids on neighboring tribes when they had met traders, who, unlike the Arab slavers, would not insist on being paid with human captives for the manufactured goods they brought. Now, I know this will seem shocking that Africans did, in fact, trade with the slave traders who came, the East African slavers. I mean, Livingstone saw between 400 and 600 people butchered by these Arabs at Nyangwe on the Congo. And it was a sort of an epic moment. He was thinking endlessly what the hell could be done. Because then after that, in traveling through Africa, he realized that lots of the people who were imprisoned and taken away by the slavers had actually been sold by Africans. So he was endlessly tasking the Africans and asking them questions and saying to them things like, if you sell your fellows, you're like the man who holds the victim while the Arab performs the murder. And he was given many excuses. If so-and-so gives up selling, so will we. It's the fault of the Arabs who tempt us with fine clothes and guns. I would rather keep all my people to cultivate more land, but my neighbor allows his people to kidnap mine, and I must buy ammunition to defend them. And this actually was quite a good point. In a very lawless country, made lawless by these Arab intruders, you needed to be able to defend yourself. As early as 1851, when Livingstone first arrived on the Zambezi, he discovered that the tribes at the very heart of Africa were selling people to the Mambari. This was they were the mixed race middlemen working for the Portuguese slave traders in Angola. And the doctor's great hope, which he came up with, was that a combination of Christian missionaries and traders would defeat the slave trade in the manner I've spoken of, by giving Africans a choice of how to buy goods, and free Africans from centuries of subsistence living as well. Because Livingstone's dream was that European agricultural methods would enable them to build up food surpluses to sell locally, and even employ others whose wages would eventually be taxed, and this is obviously a long time later, and one day make possible the railways, roads, and schools on which more advanced societies depended. So bringing prosperity to the Congolese and eliminating slavery was what Stanley meant by his sacred task. But what did Leopold really want from the Congo? And what precisely did he tell Stanley when employing him? In 1876, when Stanley had still been navigating the Congo on his great trans-Africa journey, Leopold had supervised an international conference in Brussels to launch what he described as a crusade to open to civilization the only part of the globe where it has yet to penetrate. At this stage of his life, Leopold was widely considered one of the world's greatest philanthropists. His aim, he told Stanley, was to place international scientific and medical stations in the interior of Africa from which the Arab slave trade could be observed and ultimately destroyed. The king expressed his real purpose in a letter to his ambassador in London, which has already been mentioned. I do not wish to miss the opportunity of our obtaining a share in this magnificent African cake. For many years, the king had longed to acquire a profitable colony to boost the wealth and standing of his very small country, Belgium. And so he watched Stanley's epic journey closely from afar, reading all his dispatches to the Daily Telegraph. And when Stanley arrived at Marseille's railway station after crossing the Mediterranean from Suez en route to London, 2 Belgian officials stepped forward to greet him with an offer of employment on some unspecified African project. Stanley turned them down, but suggested they approach him in 6 months' time. In the meantime, he meant to do his utmost to persuade the British government to send him back to the Congo to explore more territory and investigate the region's trading prospects, a bit like Livingstone was sent back to the Zambezi on his rather disastrous Zambezi expedition. But the British government was already too involved with Nigeria to interest itself in the Congo, with its malarial river, dense jungles, and to judge from Stanley's writing, quite often hostile inhabitants. But Leopold had no such objections. And when Stanley finally gave up hope of interesting Britain, Leopold welcomed him to his palace at Laeken outside Brussels. The king was passionately eager to meet this able and enterprising American, as he called him, whom he was planning to equip from top to toe, in his own words, and give him supplies in abundance. Leopold secretly wanted Stanley to take possession of the whole Congo basin, but feared the British would stop him if he tried. I am therefore thinking, he wrote to a courtier, of entrusting Stanley with a purely exploratory mission, which will offend no one, and will provide us with some posts staffed and equipped, and with a high command for them, which we can develop when Europe has got used to our pretensions on the Congo. Stanley's mission, he was told, would be financed and run by Leopold's innocuous-sounding Comité d'études du Congo, and involved establishing stations for scientific, philanthropic, and commercial purposes on the river, as well as building a road past the cataracts to enable steamers to voyage on the upper Congo. In late 1878, no royal servant was going to be rash enough to enlighten Stanley about his master's appetite for African cake. But Stanley was no fool and suspected that Leopold might secretly be dreaming of establishing a Belgian colony, but the idea that he was aiming for a colony owned solely by himself struck him as laughable. Were Leopold to attempt to acquire any kind of colony, Stanley was certain that he would be elbowed out by Britain, France, or Germany. The Belgians, he wrote, strike me as being a peculiarly innocent people. That was his comment on the inflated idea of their own importance in this regard. In order to get his steamers past the cataracts below Stanley Pool, Stanley realized the road he and his men would soon be building would have to be 200 miles long, a massive task. The boilers and many metal parts of the steamers destined for the upper river would have to be drawn along it on huge carts. Stanley insisted that he must have as many Wangwana, the Swahili-speaking free men of Zanzibar, as could be engaged to be the backbone of his workforce. In fact, the 130 available Wangwana would be half the number needed, so untrained locals would have to make up the difference. Many of the Wangwana employed by him had been on his Trans-Africa journey, and some even on the Livingstone search expedition. Wadi Rehani had been his efficient storekeeper and would perform the same function now. My own dear, brave Oledi had been his outstanding coxswain on the Congo. Susie, Livingstone's longest serving companion, known by Stanley since 1871, would go on to establish for Stanley the settlement called Leopoldville, before that Kinshasa. They and Sudi, a survivor of the cataracts, and young Mabruki Ndogo, a favorite gun bearer on the Trans-Africa journey, would also be part of Stanley's inner circle. So too would Kwala Idris or Douala, a brilliant young Somali who spoke English, Swahili, and 2 other African languages. He'd been a coachman in Brooklyn and a cabin boy on an American ship. He would be Stanley's chief negotiator with Congolese chiefs and would be paid as much as Stanley's European engineers. He would nurse Stanley when malaria seemed sure to kill him. Stanley also engaged half a dozen Belgian officers, only one of whom pleased him. The rest he thought spoiled, finicky, and feeble, since they required the help of numerous black servants who would otherwise have been free for more useful work. Only 3 Europeans, Anthony Swinburne, who had been on a journalistic assignment on the Gold Coast with Stanley, and 2 Danish seamen were part of Stanley's inner circle. These men, both black and white, Stanley thought of as his African family. In England, Stanley's life had been made wretched by the press and by gentlemen geographers who had belittled him, all of whom he escaped when in Africa. Such a relief, he wrote in his diary, to find oneself among unconventional people with whom one can talk without a chance remark being flung and broadcast before readers. The task of building a road and hauling ships in sections was an epic one. Once a boiler broke free on a hill, injuring 6 men, one of them gravely. But Stanley was not discouraged. He worked with his men, wielding a sledgehammer to break up stones from the core of the road, hence his African nickname, Bula Matari, the breaker of stones. Leopold demanded that while conveying the steamer's parts to the pool, Stanley should race the charismatic French explorer, Pierre Savognin de Brazza, to the Upper Congo. When Stanley met Brazza, the Frenchman pretended to be an explorer, pure and simple. But as Stanley soon discovered, Brazza was signing treaties with chiefs who were unwittingly giving away their land and sovereignty to France. When Leopold instructed Stanley to make similar treaties, he refused. The Congolese must not be treated as conquered subjects. That's all wrong. It is we who are their tenants, Stanley retorted. The treaties Stanley signed with chiefs merely gave him the right to build and trade in particular places in exchange for various payments in goods. When Leopold eventually found out about these treaties, he was enraged, telling his secretary, Colonel Strauch, "The terms of the treaties Stanley has made with native chiefs do not satisfy me. There must at least be an added article to the effect that they delegate to us their sovereign rights over the territories. The treaties must be as brief as possible and in few words grant us everything." But Stanley continued to make his own eminently fair rental agreements until repeated bouts of malaria forced him back to England for 5 months in 1882. This gave Leopold his opportunity to send out a retired British general and a team of negotiators to the Congo to concoct the treaties he wanted. Meanwhile, Stanley's treaties were furtively collected up and destroyed, except for 2 which escaped his attentions and which I ran to earth in Brussels. During his furlough in Europe, Stanley caused great anger to Leopold by mocking the French national hero, Brazza, at a banquet in Paris. Stanley claimed that the treaty Brazza had signed with Chief Makoko, an important ruler on the northern bank of Stanley Pool, had not been understood by the African. Sorry, I'm just going to, okay, somebody else is getting it. Had not been understood by the African chief. Who could believe, inquired Stanley, that Chief Makoko, had been so struck by the simple ways of the great traveller and so full of admiration for the tricolour flag that he chose a piece of territory 9 miles long with its revenues, villages, inhabitants, goats, pigs, all its habitations, and presumably its income tax as well, and gave it to the traveller when all Monsieur de Brazza's presents would not pay for the goats Makoko had let him eat. A fierce diplomatic row ensued because the French government was using this dishonest treaty as a pretext for grabbing the entire north bank of the Congo. Leopold was furious with Stanley because he feared that his own attempts to seize the entire south bank would now be thwarted if the angry French sent a warship to the Lower Congo. This possibility terrified Leopold. A year later, to foreclose this eventuality, the king came to a secret agreement promising the French, among other things, that when Stanley next left the Congo, he would never return. Yet months earlier, the king had promised Stanley that he would return as his first governor of the Congo. Leopold would owe his future possession of the Congo to one of Stanley's closest friends and assistants, Anthony Swinburne, whom he had known since Anthony was a boy. Now a brilliant African linguist, the 21-year-old Swinburne was loved by the Congolese. His adored African mistress was one of Chief Nchuvila's of Kinshasa's daughters, with whom he was raising their children. Because of his popularity, Stanley appointed him his station chief at Kinshasa, the most important settlement on the south bank of the pool. If Brazza captured this strategic place, and he would try, the Congo basin would likely fall into the hands of the French. But Swinburne defeated Brazza and his men with a mixture of diplomatic tact, steely courage, and the full support of Chief Nchuvila and his sons. Despite Stanley's success in building his road and his trading stations, and in denying the French the entire southern bank of the river, Leopold had betrayed him. Back in England in 1884, Stanley waited in vain for the royal instruction to return to Africa. Leopold's promise to the French was one reason he abandoned Stanley. The other was his knowledge that his enterprising American would never help him grab the country for himself. Leopold had proposed to Stanley linking the various trading stations in a confederation as a way of creating a unified state. Stanley had dismissed this idea as madness, the very word he used, adding that these chiefs own and possess the soil and should retain their every tribal right. While working for Leopold, Stanley did his best to rein in the behavior of Belgian officers. When Lieutenant Branconier flogged Mabruki Nadogo, Stanley's servant and friend, Stanley reported him to Leopold and notified Branconier that cruelty is not possible. He rebuked other officers for failing to learn local languages and to appreciate, Stanley's words, the extraordinary gifts for commerce these people possess. He tried to send home numerous Belgians, only to be thwarted by Leopold. Before leaving the Congo for the last time as Leopold's chief agent, he wrote, "If Europeans will only study human nature in the vicinity of the pool, they will go home thoughtful men and may return again to this land to put to good use the wisdom they should have gained." Yet the cruelly ironic fact is that Stanley's brilliance as a pioneer and leader would make it possible for Leopold to acquire the Congo at the Berlin Conference early in 1885. Leopold had offered as evidence of ownership, not Stanley's treaties, but those falsely obtained for him by the team led by the retired British General Goldsmith. Yet Stanley's road and trading stations and the steamships on the river suggested to the rulers of Europe that the basis for a state existed. Stanley was not invited to join Leopold's delegation in Berlin, but managed to attend as an observer attached to the US delegation to witness the heads of state of Europe accepting Leopold as the colonial master of Congo. It must have been a sad occasion for him. Recently, it's been claimed by a Canadian academic that although Stanley left the Congo before the red rubber atrocities started there, this does not mean that he disapproved of the king's policies instituted after Stanley's departure. I utterly disagree with this. Leopold never breathed a word to Stanley about his decrees of 1892, whereby 1/3 of vacant lands, as he defined territory not farmed by Africans, became the domaine privé, the king's land. Forced labor, shootings, and mutilations used to terrify rubber collectors into being more productive have been unknown in Stanley's day, when rubber was not collected. He was appalled to read about such things a decade later. These crimes arose directly from Leopold's greed and from John Dunlop's 1888 invention of the inflatable inner tube, which, thanks to the bicycling craze of the 1890s, quintupled the price of Congolese rubber, making Leopold one of the richest men in the world. It is outrageous to imply, as this academic has done, that Stanley approved of the treatment of the rubber collectors. All the men who had worked for him had had contracts, and Stanley had even insisted that Leopold paid for the Wangwana to be shipped back to Zanzibar by steamer at the end of their term of service. When Stanley read about the atrocities, he wrote to the Times condemning them, describing crimes such as cutting off a woman's breasts, dismembering one girl, and cutting off the feet of another. He named the officers who he believed had committed the crimes. Then, after reading an account of the atrocities by his close friend Edward Glave, Stanley travelled to Brussels to tell the king in person that he should admit an international tribunal to investigate. Leopold was furious. Would the British government allow an investigation of brutality in Ireland, or America permit interference in the Philippines? Stanley was never granted another audience with Leopold. He left the Congo, having done his utmost to curb the king's greed and rapacity, and it is a travesty of the truth to view him as having been in any way complicit in Leopold's crimes. Thank you for listening to this rather long exposition.
Well, it's absolutely fascinating. Don't
Thank you.
apologise at all. Thank you so much. Thank you. I can see clapping. Oh, wow. Fantastic. Were you reading directly from your book? Or
no, I wrote you something
paper?
specially
Right.
because my chapter on who stole the Congo is quite long, and
Right.
other chapters about Stanley and the atrocities are very long. And I mean, it's difficult because one can't really go into Stanley. Stanley was such a strange and remarkable person. I mean, Norbert has touched on some things, like, for example, the fact that he was basically effectively an orphan. His mother abandoned him. His father was either a drunkard or the local solicitor who disowned him. And he grew up with the worst kind of rejection possible. He was put in the workhouse when he was 6 years old. He was there till he was 15. He was totally abandoned, and that he became the person he was a kind of miracle. It was by reinventing himself, as has been said. But I can't really talk about it. It's too complicated and long a subject.
No.
And anybody who's interested in him should read my book, I guess.
Yes, well, I definitely think we need to be making these wonderful books, and yours included. Let people have access to them. At least know that there are such books, and yours is extremely fascinating. With the paper that you wrote specially for us, would it be possible for us to have a copy of that to attach?
Yeah,
to
I
the
can send you
website?
one. I mean, I can't. In fact, earlier I was hopping up and down because my cottage in Cornwall has been flooded today.
Oh, no.
Some terrible failure of the plumbing has occurred. So
Oh,
I was
dear.
trying to talk to, my housekeeper down there and other people in Cornwall,
Right.
while trying to listen also to what was going on here. And I was
All right.
whizzing emails around and doing all the rest of it. So I think I'm probably going to be busy today, but I'll try and send it. I'll send it to you. Liz, so
Thank
can
you.
disseminate it.
Yes, that would be great. That would be really great. Now, we've got time for some more questions and some discussion. But Gwyneth, I want to ask if you're with us at the moment. Are you listening in, Gwyneth?
Hello.
Gwyneth.
Yes. Hello.
Lovely to hear you. You're there.
Yes, I am here, but I'm in a hospital ward. So.
Oh my dear, my dear.
So I hope to come out this afternoon. But.
All right. Okay then. Well, thank you very much, and I hope this is all that you wished. Now, what I'm going to make a suggestion is that next week we carry on with some of this discussion, because Gwyneth, you are going to tell us more about the statue and the work that you've been doing in Denby, and Norbert, I'm sure you'll be coming back on this. And then we've also got the points that Jim made about how are we going to tell this history. And I know that Professor Watchak is particularly interested in this point of view of Africans telling African history. But we've got Tim with us now, and it would be really great if that's all right with you, Gwyneth. We won't ask any more of you then.
If I could just
next week, Gwyneth. Okay.
Or perhaps ask Tim, the quotes that are often used against Stanley by Kirk, for example, perhaps Tim could just explain the jealousies and the main characters who tried to blacken Stanley.
Oh, right. Okay. Is that
Are you able
okay,
to do
Tim?
that, Tim?
Yes, yes. I mean, I can talk a bit about this. I mean, on the whole, I mean, if you think Stanley was sent, well, he was sent by the editor of the New York Herald, incredibly rich young millionaire who was very insensitive and all the rest of it, but he did choke up the money and rather reluctantly wasn't actually there in Zanzibar when Stanley first went there. And as a result of Stanley's mission to look after Livingstone and to succor him, which he did do, definitely. I mean, you know, he saved Livingstone really at a time when all his possessions, Livingstone had just witnessed this terrible massacre on the Congo. And he came back completely penniless with no possessions. His property in Ujiji had been stolen by the Arabs there, and he had nothing. So Stanley's arrival literally saved his life. Anyway, when Stanley reached the coast, he discovered that the Royal Geographical Society had sent a similar expedition to look after and help Livingstone, but they realized to their horror that actually somebody else had done it for them, and they felt complete idiots, as one would do, just as one was setting out to realize that job done by somebody else. So Stanley got off on the wrong foot with the Royal Geographical Society. He was a working class boy who'd been educated in a workhouse. He'd then been to America. Nobody really knew quite what he was. He pretended to be an American, but various members of the Royal Geographical Society secretly discovered that he came from Wales, and he was deeply insecure about all this. So he quite arrogantly reminded them that, you know, that he was somebody who had done a job and that they had not managed to do it and all the rest of it, and rubbed them up all the wrong way. And they remained, many people, including the Secretary of the Royal Geographical Society, a very influential man, remained really his enemies for much of his life. Although at the end of his trans-Africa journey, they did defend him in the various rows because they wanted really to have some part in the greatest geographical journey ever attempted. The Portuguese loathed him because clearly, as a result of his journey, they lost the possibility of actually creating a colony on the river. And they lost no opportunity at all to let out canards of him having whole gangs of slave labor in chains and all the rest of it. And they used, I suppose, what would be the equivalent of the internet of the day, you know, local papers, letters to friends, the whole works aimed at him. He had, because he changed his nationality later he basically thought that joining the American army and fighting in the American Civil War made him an American, but of course it didn't at all. He was still British. He briefly assumed American nationality in order to protect his American copyrights, which were very valuable. But then he realized that he wanted to come home, he wanted to marry a Welsh woman, and that he wanted to live in England. And so he changed his nationality again. And as you can imagine, there were many bruised feelings about these changes of nationality, that he was somehow undependable and that he had no loyalty either to where he came from or to the country that had actually given him his great opportunities, which was America. So he was always somebody, because he could never tell the truth about his family, he was never prepared to acknowledge that he'd been illegitimate and that he'd been a workhouse boy. And so he hung on to this idea that he was an American far longer than it was really good for him, because it denied him the popularity he would otherwise have known in his native country. So it was a kind of tragedy. He was trying to, he was never able to write an autobiography because of the lies he told about himself. But, you know, we have to remember what an incredibly cruel place Britain was in the 60s, 70s, and 80s of the last century. I mean, the snobbery was unbelievable. You you know, even among the right people, there were the wrong people. And everybody looked down on somebody. And a workhouse boy was, and an illegitimate workhouse boy, was the very bottom of the pile. And, you know, when one can be censorious and one can say, well, he wasn't true to himself, he was shamed. Yes, he was. And he was not prepared to hand these people a terrific stick to beat him with, who had treated him so badly. So Stanley had enemies, which he really very often didn't deserve. Almost all his problems were created by his insecurity, including his exaggeration of encounters with Africans, which arose directly out of his, if anybody offended him, he had to punish them. And even if he hadn't punished them, he would say he had. So his diaries, if you compare various bits of them, you'll find that there are numerous different accounts of great encounters, most of which turn out to be completely fictional. So it is a sad story, and I'm very sorry that he found it very difficult to make friends too. But if we'd been treated as he was, abandoned by both our parents and forced to create an identity for oneself, even a name, because one's old name connected one to the sufferings of one's childhood, we should have perhaps a little compassion when looking at the great liar, and wish that some of other people had been allowed to be sympathetic too.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you. That was a really clear explanation. Absolutely fascinating. And Gwyneth, thank you for asking that and raising that point. So I think we will talk again next week. Marie, you'd like to ask a question, or are you clapping? Excellent. I think she's clapping. Good.
Oh, I'm not clapping.
Oh, you're asking a question, are you?
Actually, yes. I don't know if I'm able to not ask a question, but kind of comment.
Comment. Yeah, comment's fine.
Yeah. So I'm Marie-Claire Farey. I'm Congolese, living in London. I'm part of Common Cause UK, which is a platform of Congolese women. But I'm also a member of WILF, the Women International League for Peace and Freedom. I'm actually a research scientist and work a lot on gender and looking at women's participation. So I was very intrigued by, I think, one comment that was made. I'm not sure, I can't see his name anymore here. He was talking about involving more young people into history, why some of the young people are not reading. Oh yeah, it was Dr. Jim, who was, how can we make sure that young people or people are interested in the history, not only of Africa, but India, you know, all these things. And it's true what Ya Kil said, that Africa was already there, it was not discovered. And if one of the things that we see is actually that the narrative of African has been deleted. I mean, all of the history, we are faced with the patronizing history of Western conqueror who have, I mean, Africa was conquest. I mean, the war was won, if we can say it like that. So as they say, the history is always written by those who have conquered. So, but one of the things that I would like to draw your attention is that when we talk about Livingstone, we talk about all these people, even of the African, how can I say it? The African fathers, as they call them, the father of independence. As we are here, we can only hear the voice of men, the phallocrats. It's men mostly, and it's really shocking, not only to myself, but to many people, is like African women have not existed in the whole of those history. Not only we hear the history coming from men, white men, you know, European men, we don't hear the history by white women. And if you can remember some of the things that are put in the book from, how can I say, the book that Ya Kil talked about, I forgot the name of Conrad, the hand that was cut, the picture taken was by a white woman, a European woman, who took the first pictures and demonstrated how, you know, those hands were cut. Kimpavita has been erased from history. I don't know if many of you have heard about Kim Pavita. She was a politician, but who was actually portrayed as a witch, as a religious leader, to avoid saying that she was a politician and the person who was actually fighting for her right and the right of her fellow citizen. So the history of Africa is not only erased by white men, but also by Black men. And when Norbert has shown the book written by Professor Ndaiwel, how many Congolese women have been erased from the history even of the Congo? Because when we talk about Patrice Lumumba, we fail to talk about the nationalist women who are there. So I just wanted to say that in response to Dr. Jim, is that key things that are being forgotten is that the narrative are often that of men. The narrative of women are not heard. And obviously, you know, the narrative of the youth are not heard either. So we have a big task ahead of us to kind of bring a lot of the voices that are not there and make it a bit more universal. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I would like to extend an invitation, Marie-Claire. Are you able to join us next week? Because I think it would be extremely interesting if we could give you a slot and you can share some of these stories.
Yeah, why not? I came in just to, because Norbert sent it in the group where we are with Congolese. And
good.
At some point, I would try and make sure, but I just post, I had surgery not long ago, so I'm actually convalescent. Hopefully I'll be able to join you. Thank you.
Well, just be careful, look after yourself, because this is what we're doing. We're sort of weaving together the different stories and moving it on. And we also had another lady with us whose name I can't remember, Gwyneth, and she's written about Stanley's wife. Now, it's a different dimension to the story, but yes.
Helen. Dr. Helen Papworth.
Thank you, Helen Papworth. Could I remember that? So Helen wasn't able to join us today, but she's going to tell us that story, because I do think we need to keep telling the story balanced.
Yeah.
Professor Shat, would you like to comment next?
Yeah, just a quick
maybe
clarification to what the last speaker said. African and history generally has not been very fair to women in terms of documenting their activities, but it depends on the agenda setting in the discipline itself. So I think the fairer word to use is silenced and not erased. I think the women's voices have not been erased. They have just been silenced, and they are emerging. In Nigeria, for example, they have recovered the space. In one of the presentations I made, I showed how Nigerian women are contributing to the discourses. And so I think the fair word is to say they've been silenced, but they are recovering the space. The space is not as dark as it were in the colonial period. I think we can upgrade it from there.
I think that's absolutely right.
I would disagree. Sorry.
Oh.
Yeah, erase definitely. Silence, yes, of course, but erase definitely. Yes.
Okay.
So we need to have some more conversations about that.
Liz?
Yes.
Yeah? I was invited in Kinshasa last year to give a speech about my book about Lumumba, but not about Lumumba. It was during the celebration of the Women's Days. It was about the forgotten and the silenced heroine. Because in my book, I try to fill this vacuum. Not only I'm talking about Kim Pavita, but I talk in the beginning when I make a speech, I start with my grandmother. And in the book, I mention about, I talk about the first slave trade ship who came from the kingdom of the Ndongo, was near the kingdom of the Congo kingdom. But the queen there was Queen Nzinga. And the first time I learned from Queen Nzinga was from the historian, the Cameroon historian living with me in Newport, Dr. Olivier Totele. And there is now an interesting French book published about all those women heroines, not only in Nzinga, but in Jamaica, the Queen of Jamaica, who fought against the slave trade. And there is a story we never know, the story of the women of Nder of Senegal. I mentioned in my book, Nder of Senegal, or the women who fought against the slave trade. And they did exactly what the Jewish people did in Masada. So they fought for the entire day without men, because the men were hunting, and because they was tired, what they did, they burned themselves instead of becoming slave trade. But all those stories, the story we are talking about Lumumba, yes. But can you imagine that Lumumba's wife became widows and live almost 60 years without being married? We are, if you check in now in Burkina Faso, the wife of the former president, Thomas Sankara, she's there without, no, she said that by the fidelity of my men, I will not be married. And all those silence heroine are not mentioned. So in my book, I try really to fill this vacuum, because it's important what Marie-Claire said. And Marie-Claire need also to mention, I will mention next time, that in the Congolese community, to commemorate the 60 years of 17 African countries' independence, this year, the Congolese community, we decided to publish a manifesto, the first manifesto. I just shared the link with you. And we decided that we need to celebrate the Congo Days, which will be the day the first Congolese died in Welsh. And so the president will speak about it next time. We will invite him. But I think it's important what Marie-Claire mentioned. Most of the time, our mom, you know, I start and I want the support from you. I kick off now the project of bringing bikes in village to help our moms. Because our mom, they suffer in the village, they go in the farm, they feed us, and our dads just they are sitting, you know, in under the mango streets drinking. And so I want to get it. I have now in Newport 100 bikes. So I want your support. We need to go back to help all our moms who are working. You know, without our mom, we will not never be in the school. So please, thank you, Marie-Claire, for that to mention. And we, your son, is important for us to fill this vacuum.
Thank you, Norbert. I think that's really important. Professor Fakshat.
Yeah, I think we will continue to fill the vacuum, but you know, history is, there's no universal history that tells the story of everyone at the same time. And it is contextual. So in the Congo, the voices of the women might have been erased, but it's not erased worldwide. So if we put context to this, we'll really understand ourselves. And we'll be really happy if you return the erased versions. They will really contribute to our historiography. We're looking forward to it.
That's really wonderful. Thank you. Can I just ask Simon something? Simon, we're coming to the end of the session now. And I know you were going to do something about your research work and the plans that you've got to do some more research about Jacob Wainwright. Would it be possible to put that back to next week?
Absolutely, yep. Yep.
That would be great. And hopefully Chief Thomas will be able to join us as well next week, and he'll be able to make his presentation. We've come to the end of the allocation that we gave, the extra time, but I think we could have spent a whole day. So many interesting points have come up. I just need to mention that our colleague Sibani Roy has joined us, Dr. Sibani Roy from Nwami. I'm glad you were able to join us just at the rounding off of the session, but it's been really good, and we'll be carrying on with this next week because Sibani helped us set up the conferences that we ran over the years when we could all get together in Colwyn Bay. Those were good days. Anyway, thank you so much, everybody. In reverse order, thank you very much indeed, Tim. That was such a clear presentation, and you recognize that not everybody can read your book, not everybody can get all that information out of the chapters, and to present clearly the points that you did was really helpful. Thank you so much, Tim. Thank you very much indeed. that's going to be a very valuable part of as we pull things together in this story. Norbert, thank you very much indeed for your presentation and your enthusiasm and determinedness to make sure that we keep following these stories through. Jim, thank you very much for your comments. Professor Satie has left us now, but he's keeping a good eye on us and very interested in what we're doing. I can't see who's chatting. Ricardo, you've been with us throughout. Thank you so much. Ricardo, was there anything you wanted to add? Because you haven't...
Yes, thank you. My name is Ricardo, originally from Uganda, and I represent an organization called Shared Heritage and Parenting and Mentoria, in brief. I would like to say thank you to Jim, Gil. I have your book, which I have just got from the Amazon, which is Stanley, The Impossible Life of Africa's Greatest Explorer. Thank you for this book. It talks about Stanley in Uganda. The perspective we have heard today is about Stanley mostly in Congo, but Stanley, we Ugandans, we have got another perspective about Stanley. We look at him as a philanthropic person, a person who can say is one of the founding fathers of modern Uganda. And Ugandans love him so much because of his contribution to Uganda. If it were not for Stanley, maybe Uganda would not be what it is today. We would not be Ugandans as we feel we are. He's the one who opened the doors of Uganda to Europe, because as you may know, he is the one who wrote the letter which exposed Uganda at that moment, inviting the missionaries, not only missionaries, but people who could develop Uganda. So that perspective is portrayed in this book, and maybe sorry?
Excellent.
So
because I'm just wondering, Ricardo, are you available next week? Because I think it would be really helpful to pull all these threads together next week. If you could tell us some more about
I will be there. I'm happy to be there.
That would be excellent. And then I think Gwyneth will be feeling better as well, and she'll be able to join us. And I think, Mr. Juma, you'll be able to also ask more questions and contribute next week. Is that possible?
Why not? Why not? We're here to learn and to see the perspective. But I would like to reiterate the importance of Professor, I can't remember his surname now.
Fwakshat.
Yeah, because I think in the history, obviously the European are frustrated people, and they came to Africa where they were welcomed widely by people who are comfortable in their river, in their villages, and but then they just missed the point and they just used their frustration to destroy and to do whatever they've done. But I would like personally to thank Simon for his important work and for his contribution, and also for a copy that I've read about African Institute, which I lost in Kampala in my 3 months time in there. But that book, obviously, I didn't present myself. I'm part of Belong, but I'm also the chairman for the African Institute in Nottingham. And then it was really eye-opening when I was reading the African Institute and Colin Bay. And so we want to continue next week for better coverage, and everyone can have their voice heard. But as far as I'm concerned, I'm just pleased that everyone can have their say, and we want more voices from the women as well, because this is the common endeavor. But I think for Europe, they need to understand that the day are closing. You know, everyone now is interested. Europe is the best and the closest ally or partner. But if they want to go back to their old story, like France now is stealing gold in Mali, and then they're saying they're going to fight terrorism. There is no terrorism at all. We know it's all games. But then let's go next week and hear more about the best stories.
Okay, well that's really kind of you, and that's just what we'll do. And I like the flexibility that we've got. So thank you so much to you all. Is there anybody else I've not included? Hunita, do you want to add anything? She's not there, right? Okay, Lindsay, do you want to add anything? We've just had a thank you in the chat from Sibani Roy saying that she's going to meet again, and we'll meet again with Jim. And she also said something that's nipped out of it, scrolled down. I can't read it, but she was saying she was delighted to be here. That's lovely, Sibani. Right, okay then. Well, big thank you.
Liz,
sorry, yes.
It's Juanita. Sorry, I couldn't unmute myself fast enough when you were asking if I had anything to say. I just wanted to say thank you to Tim. And I don't know if we've got time to ask a very quick question, but I'm wondering if Stanley kept a diary throughout his life. And if I mean, I know you say we don't know really how he felt necessarily about what King Leopold got up to, but I'm just wondering if he expressed any regrets later on in his life, and if there are any diaries that kind of indicate the regrets he had long term.
Tim.
Can I say something?
Tim.
Yeah.
Tim.
No, you are muted, Tim.
Tim.
Yeah. Okay.
Muted. Thank you.
Am I unmuted now?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you now. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I think Stanley would have felt that he didn't have a case to. I mean, he was obviously very upset that Leopold took over the Congo, and he was upset about everything that happened afterwards. But in a sense, there was nothing really that he could do about it. He wrote his letter to the Times. He never saw Leopold again, and he said that the Congo was an Augean stables, and that if he was ever asked to clear it up, he would think that it would kill him. For the last 15 to 20 years of his life, because of taking quinine in huge doses, his stomach was in very bad order, and he suffered from chronic indigestion of the kind which you only get if, in fact, if you're what's it called? The pipe that goes down to your stomach. I've forgotten.
Esophagus.
Esophagus, that's right. His esophagus was not functioning properly and was letting acid up, and he was a real mess. And he also had heart problems. So he said that if he was ever asked to go back to try to sort it out, he didn't think that he could ever manage it, and that it would kill him. So apart from that, I think it's very difficult, because it's really hard if you've labored incredibly hard and you've tried to be fair and to open somewhere to commerce, which you believed would be to the people's advantage, and then somebody else hijacks your efforts, takes advantages of them, and steals the whole country. It's not something necessarily that you want to revisit a lot. Stanley tried to get on with his life. He found a wife at last, and it was a miracle that he had actually managed to form a loving relationship, given his background. And he then was sent in a semi-official way to rescue Emin Pasha, who was Gordon's second in command out in the Sudan, between the Sudan and Uganda, that whole area which is so troubled even now. And he was so fully engaged in that, he nearly died many times there. He suffered appalling privations, and the whole thing was a complete disaster for reasons that are far too complicated for me to go into in answer to the question. So he really had his work cut out simply to survive as a human being for about 5 years after this happened. And then there was the whole public shock horror of the revelations that came about what some of his followers had got up to, even although he was hundreds of miles away from them. On his last expedition, he was foolish enough. He'd always employed, if he possibly could, working class white men and no gentlemen, because he had the deepest suspicion of British gentlemen.
Yeah.
And on this occasion, he took a man called Major Barttelot, who went completely crazy, really, and did some really gruesome things. And another man called James Jameson, whose family owned a whiskey company. And James Jameson, unfortunately, made sketches of an African girl who had been sold to Arabs being dismembered and eaten. And when this came out, as you can imagine, the shock horror effect on Stanley's reputation, that he'd been in the same expedition as a man capable of that. Although in fact, he'd been hundreds of miles away and had been forced into choosing this man because he was so rich and could bring, several £1,000s to the enterprise. So he couldn't think too much about the Congo after that. Although he was obviously very horrified by all the atrocities. He had a valet who joined Leopold's sort of equivalent to a quasi-police force out there. I can't remember the name, actually. I'm 75 and occasionally these things completely vanish from my mind. But anyway, he joined this force. And he was in the Eastern Congo. And he sent Stanley the kind of letters that would make you faint about what was going on there. Yeah. As a result of that, Stanley was able to make several contributions to the debate in Parliament. And he said to him, on no account, tell me anything but the absolute truth. I want whatever it is, however bad. So that did keep him up to the mark, really.
Just to mention, just to add to what Tim just said, the very simple way you need to put, as I say most of the time, not only, I wrote a book in 1998 about the history of the evangelization where I'm from. And this book tells about the Stanley journey in the area where Leopold II cut hand of people, the Maindome where I'm from. And that is interesting to make a balance. The second thing is interesting to put things in timeline. Stanley died in 1904.
Donc, comme ils sont venus faire l'évangélisation, ils étaient
alors
que c'était des militaires.
Right. So, Mr. Juma, can you switch your microphone off, please? Thank you.
Oh, sorry, I'm leaving. Thank you.
Yes, that's okay. Thank you.